The Yuba County Five case is one of the most perplexing unsolved mysteries in American history. It involves 5 men, Gary Mathias, Jack Madruga, Bill Sterling, Ted Wire and Jack Hewitt, who vanished in February 1978 after attending a college basketball game. Hello everyone, welcome back to episode 22 of Spooky and Kooky.
As always, if you're into anything spooky, kooky, horror, paranormal, conspiracy, then you're in the right place. We talk about it all here, and today we're doing a 2-part episode of missing people.
Yeah, so I'll kick it off with my case and then our second episode will be yours. Yeah. I'm really looking forward to this and seeing what you guys think. My case is about the Yuba County Five, which I know you've not heard of before.
Never heard of.
So it'll be your fresh perspective. So, the Yuba County Five case is one of the most perplexing unsolved mysteries in American history. It involves 5 men, Gary Mathias, Jack Madruga, Bill Sterling, Ted Wire and Jack Hewitt, who vanished in February 1978 after attending a college basketball game. Though friends and family, along with the rest of the town, would refer to the group as the Boys, they were actually all aged between 24 to 32. And the 5 men became friends through the Gateway projects, which helped people with learning disabilities or mental health issues. Since the boys' learning difficulties and mental illnesses were heavily emphasised upon the discovery of the boys' disappearance, I thought it was probably best to go into a little bit more about each of them and what they were like. And this is from sources online and friends and family that knew them. So I'll start with Jack, or Jackie Hewitt. He was the youngest of the group. He was 24 at the time and he had the most severe learning difficulties of the 5. He was illiterate and suffered with a speech impediment, and Hewitt worked on his dad's farm where he would often ride his dirt bike around the property. He found school really difficult, but everyone that knew him described him as very kind and quiet. Jack's best friend was Ted Wire. He was the oldest of the group, aged 32. Ted was also described as a very friendly man and really easy to get along with. He was able to hold down a job and worked as a bag boy in a local grocery store, but it was said that Ted's main issue was that he lacked common sense. So I'll give you some examples of this. So he never got his driver's license because he didn't understand why you had to stop at stop signs, and his family manages his finances for him, but on one occasion he spent $100 just on pencils. Nothing special, just normal pencils.
Is it bad that I'm like drawing similarities between him and myself? I also find it mad that in America there is a job of bag boy.
How mad is that? Yeah, I know.
In the UK we have to pack away our own groceries.
And it could be an Olympic sport because the way they scan those, if you're not at a self-checkout, is at speed. One night, Ted's family home caught on fire and his parents rushed to his room to wake him up. So Ted, who woke up to see his ceiling on fire, tried to go back to sleep, saying if he woke up now, he might be too tired to go to work the next day. And I can relate to that because I have said some weird stuff when I've just been woken up.
Yeah, but your ceiling on fire.
Yeah, but you're not processing it. Your eyes are open and you're like, no.
You probably think it was a dream.
Yeah.
Just thinking like, I don't want to get up.
Surely not. Ted was also quite fearful. He was scared of the dark, the woods, firearms, and understandably fire after the fire in his home. But he was very protective of his friend Jack, and he would always be at Jack's side and he would stick up for him without question whenever he needed to. So Ted and Jack were the only 2 members of the group who were formally diagnosed with a learning disability, which is contrary to what the news reported at the time. Jack Madruga and Bill Sterling were just known as being slow, which, 70s.
Yeah, I was about to
very
say it's a sign of the times.
Yeah, literally.
Yeah.
Like anything a bit odd and they're like, So Jack Madruga was 30 at the time. He was one of the 2 boys in the group to have his driver's license and the only one to have his own car, which was a 1969 Mercury Montego, and it was his prized possession. He also struggled at school, but once he left he seemed to do fine and he got various jobs. He joined the army and spent several years driving a truck for the military. And once he left the military, he got a long-term job in Yuba County and even helped his mum pay her rent. So very,
Yeah, responsible.
Yeah.
Did you say where Yuba County was?
It's in California.
California, okay.
Yeah. So, like I said, Jack's car was his prized possession. He would actually do most of the car maintenance himself. It was his pride and joy. His best friend was Bill Sterling, who was 29. And him and Bill were actually friends since they were kids. So Bill was described as very lively and a social butterfly. He would talk to as many people as possible, can't relate, which was quite the opposite to shy Jack Madruga. And one of the coaches at the Gateway Project said that Bill was really intelligent, but he was just lazy. And he could do better. It was that classic. If they would only just apply themselves.
Yeah.
So that was very much Bill. He was deeply religious. He was a devout Christian and really interested in the Bible and his church congregation. And on the weekends, he would often go to local hospitals and read to the sick and elderly.
Oh.
Yeah, so I just thought it was really important to go into the details about the boys because obviously, like I say, when they disappeared, everyone basically said that they were just so dumb. They just wandered out into the woods for absolutely no reason, which clearly they function well in society. It doesn't make any sense. And they all have their own hobbies and, everything like that.
Yeah, I mean, one was driving trucks for the military. I don't think he's going to wander out in the woods for no reason whatsoever.
Yeah, so it brings me to the last member of the group and the newest member of the group, which is Gary Mathias. He joined the boys about a year before the disappearance occurred, and he was 25. Unlike the other boys, he wasn't diagnosed with a learning disability or considered slow, but he was diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia.
Right.
Like Jack Madruga, Gary also served time in the military, but it was a lot more turbulent with some drug use and violence in his past. Gary had several run-ins with the police due to a violent criminal history and multiple instances of acting out in public, but after joining the Gateway projects, he received medication to treat his schizophrenia, which he had never had before.
Yeah.
So once that was under control, he became a model citizen.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. He was thriving, and he was basically the poster boy for the Gateway projects to show that, it works if you get the help that you need. So, despite being the final member of the group, he was actually the leader, and he was very protective of the other 4 boys. And because he was seen as the most logical thinking, he would accompany them on trips and everything to make sure that they were okay. And more importantly, although they met each other through the Gateway projects, they met each other through the basketball team, which was part of the Gateway projects.
Oh, okay.
And you'll like the name. It's called the Gateway Gators.
Okay.
Yeah. So on February the 25th, 1978, the Gateway Gators were competing in a tournament that was hosted by the Special Olympics, and the winner would receive an all expenses paid trip to LA for the entire weekend. So obviously the 5 of them were super excited about that and literally counting down the days for weeks. The night before the game, they decided they were going to go and watch a UC Davis basketball game at California State Uni in Chico, which was about 50 miles away from Yuba County. So the plan was they were going to go to the game, it finished around 10, and then they were going to come straight back. And most of them actually even had their basketball stuff ready on their beds before they left. So Jack Madruga picked up the other 4 and they travelled to the game. It was a really cold night. This was in winter, obviously, and it's known for being snowy in this state. So particularly Bill's parents urged him to bring a coat, but he said, no, we're literally just going to be going to the game and then coming back. So there's no point in me bringing a coat. But little did they know, that was the last time their families would actually see the boys. Several witnesses reported seeing the five at the basketball game, and they said they were all in good spirits, and they saw them leave once the game finished. After that, the boys drove a short while to Bears Market and they got some snacks for the ride, and the attendant remembers them getting fizzy drinks and sweets, that kind of thing. So that was just before 10 p.m. There are several different accounts for what happened in the hours after that, but we know for sure that the parents began to call each other in the early hours of the morning to see if they were at one of the other one's houses, and when that became apparent that wasn't the case, Jack Madruga's mum contacted the police around 8 o'clock in the morning the next day. Police officers from both Butte County and Yuba County put out a notice for Madruga's car, and a few days had passed. There was absolutely no sign of them whatsoever. The authorities assured the families that the boys had just gone out for a joyride. But
that lasted all night?
Yeah, and they had no coats, they had no plans of doing anything else.
Just fizzy drinks and sweets.
It was unusual for them not to have contact with their family, and they were very much liking their structure, so they wouldn't really want to do anything.
Completely out of character, but the police thought that was the most logical explanation. That makes sense.
Yeah, like, oh, well, boys will be boys. You know how they be. But sadly, the parents' concerns were confirmed when Madruga's car was found on February 28th by a Plumas National Forest ranger. So the car had been abandoned at the side of a road on Oroville-Quincy Road, and the ranger actually remembers seeing that same car on the side of the road on February 25th, that night. Okay. So the night that they went missing.
So the car's not been moved since that?
Been moved.
Okay, that makes sense.
So the first mystery is, why were they there in the first place? Because this road was 70 miles in the opposite direction from their home. So I'll show you on a map how much of a detour it is. You've got their home, the game, where they were found.
Yeah, no, that's not just one wrong... That's not even joyriding.
Yeah, it was a 2-hour drive out of their way. So they would have had to driven up a partially unpaved road in the snow, in the pitch black. You definitely would know you've taken the wrong turn.
Yeah.
The Plumas National Forest is popular for the people of Yuba County because it basically has, in the winter, a permanent snow cap. So a lot of skiers, just the top of the mountain is completely covered in snow. So it's quite popular for skiers and snowboarders. And then in the summer it will melt, so then you get a lot of hunters and hikers. But 4 of the 5 boys absolutely hated the outdoors. So if they were doing some sort of detour, that would probably be the most unlikely place that they would go.
And time. If you're going to go for like a little hike through this area...
At 10 o'clock at night.
Why would you pick then? It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, Ted and Bill in particular did not like the Plumas National Forest. Ted was afraid of the woods and the dark, and Bill had been there on family trips and said he would never go again, so he just didn't go on any of the other family trips there. So it seemed like a very unlikely choice for a detour. When they searched the car on February 28th, there were marks indicating that the wheels had been spun, so that they had got stuck on the side of the road.
Yeah.
But it was really clear that all they would have had to do was push the car, because only one of the wheels was slightly misaligned, so it wasn't properly stuck.
And again, one of them was in the army, he drove trucks. He would know that you would need to just push that car, or he would have the inkling to be like, let's try and push it.
Exactly. Reporters were like, oh my god, of course they wouldn't think to push the car because they were all so slow. They just wandered off because they thought, oh my god, the car's stuck. But it doesn't make any sense. Like you say, we've got 2 people that were in the military. One person who works on his car has a good understanding of how the car works. I'm pretty sure one of the 5, at least, if not all of them, would think, let's try and give it a push.
Yeah, and I think if you're that afraid of the outdoors as well, I don't think your first thought is going to be, shall we just try and go it on foot?
Yeah.
all 5 of us, not even one of us. 2 of us wait at the car, 3 of us try and go for help. Let's just all get out and wander through these woods when we don't have a coat. One of us doesn't have a coat. We don't have supplies. We don't know where we are. I'm pretty sure before that thought, you would think, maybe we can push this car out.
Mm-hmm. So it just makes you think, was there something stopping them from doing that?
Yeah.
But investigators thought, okay, maybe the car ran out of fuel, so they hotwired it, and it still had a quarter left. Which is, I think, strange in itself, that why they took the keys, abandoned the car, but just took... No issues with the car at all. What was weird was all 4 doors were unlocked, and the driver's side window was all the way down.
So they didn't even lock it?
Didn't lock it. Did take the keys, though, and left the driver's side window down, which then you'd think you probably wouldn't have that open in the middle of winter. So did they talk to someone?
Yeah, and I feel like if you've got that much pride and joy in your car,
you wouldn't just leave it unlocked. Why are you going to leave it
unlocked? But also the window down in such a snowy area, that's going to completely ruin your car.
Yeah. Inside of the car, there was nothing out of the ordinary. There were empty drinks cans, empty sweet wrappers, which obviously they'd picked up and had sweets, so that wasn't anything odd. But there was no indication of where they went from that point. So, again, why did they leave the car 70 miles in the wrong direction, up a mountain, in the dead of night, get stuck on the side of the road, make no real attempt to get out, roll the car window down, leave it unlocked, with no coats, and venture out into the snowy woods? The police started searching around the area from where the car was found, but on the first day there was an ice storm. They actually had to cancel the search because it almost killed 2 of the search party.
Damn.
Yeah. One person nearly had a heart attack, and the second person had advanced stages of hypothermia. Yeah.
Probably better to go home.
So for the safety of them, they called it off. But then the storm raged on for days. Any sign of the boys or any clues was now buried in the snow. So it made it even harder for them to...
And I feel like at that point, after their search party fell so ill, they're going to say, we presume the worst anyway. If what had already been found, what they weren't presuming the worst, they're definitely going to presume the worst now. We're not looking for 5 people alive.
Well, they did carry on looking, but they found nothing, and it wasn't for another 4 months that they would actually find something.
Yeah.
So that was June 4th, 1978. The snow had begun to melt. There was a group of motorcyclists that were travelling up the mountain, and they were checking on the Park Service trailers. So they have them dotted around the national park, and these trailers basically have a food supply for over a year and heating supplies for the rangers, or if anyone gets caught out in the storm, you can seek refuge in there, basically. They were driving up there to check on them, and as soon as they pulled up to one of the trailers on the top of the mountain, they saw one of the front windows had been shattered, and there was a really strong smell coming from the trailer. Outside of the window, there were empty ration cans as well, so they had a strong feeling that they were going to find someone in there. And when they walked in, they saw a pair of tennis shoes that were next to one of the bedroom doors, and lying wrapped in blankets on top of one of the beds was a corpse. They notified the police, who came and searched the area immediately, and the body found on the bed was wrapped really tightly from head to toe in blankets, sort of like a mummy.
Yeah.
And when they removed the blankets, the body was so badly, it had been there for a while, that they couldn't make an identification from the face or anything like that. There was nothing left. But the clothing matched the last known clothing that Ted Wire was wearing. And they didn't know, obviously looking at him, how he had passed, but his feet were frostbitten and gangrenous. He was actually missing 5 toes. The cause of death was ruled as a pulmonary edema from pneumonia, and it was later confirmed that it was Ted. If Ted was found wrapped up in that mummy-like state, he wouldn't have been able to do that himself.
No.
So at least one other person would have had to be there with him. And the tennis shoes that they found didn't belong to Ted.
Right.
They actually belonged to Gary Mathias.
Okay.
Ted's shoes that he was last seen in were brown leather boots, and they couldn't find those at all. So, outside of the trailer, there were 2 sheds. One contained all the food supplies. The second contained all the heating supplies.
Yeah.
Both had locks on which had been cut. There were various food packets missing from the food shed, but nowhere near as many as you would think would be able to sustain even one of them, let alone 2. There were 36 packets missing, which a packet would be 1 meal.
Okay.
And they had been there potentially 4 months.
Yeah.
Definitely not enough for one person. Certainly not enough for any more than that. The heating shed had been pried open, but nothing was taken from it. And there were heating supplies. There was even a switch in there which would have turned the heating on in the trailer, but it wasn't turned on. Nothing was taken. There were books inside the trailer which they could have used for a fire. Those were left untouched. So it makes you think, if there was someone inside with frostbite and pneumonia, why didn't they take any of the heating supplies? Especially make a fire. Like, were they afraid of attracting someone to their location from the smoke? Or would the melting of the snow on the trailer give their location away? It just doesn't make any sense. And so another question that you probably think is, if there are trailers, why weren't they searched at the time they found the car for the missing boys?
Yeah.
Because they weren't even in the search area. This trailer was a further 20 miles up the mountain.
So they would have had to survive through quite a lot to get there.
They would have had to walk 20 miles from where the car...
Inexperienced wilderness men.
With no coats. And even their shoes, obviously Gary had tennis shoes on, like, they just
that
weren't...
made it to the trailer as well.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, it was 20 miles up the mountain. So then you think, how did they even walk 20 miles up the mountain in the snow? And how did they even get there alive?
It all just screams foul play.
The police concluded they could say for certain that 2 people were definitely in the trailer, and that was Gary and Ted. So that would mean there was no sign of Jack Hewitt, Bill Sterling, or Jack Madruga. The search continued around the area of the trailer, and within a couple of days they make the final discoveries of the missing Yuba County Five. Search crews traced the path from the trailer back to the car, and 11.5 miles from the car were the bodies of Jack Madruga and Bill Sterling laying side by side. So both of the bodies were very badly damaged by the elements, as you can imagine. Madruga had been partially eaten by animals, and Sterling was literally just picked bones by that point. So it's possible that on the hike to the trailer, on the first night of their disappearance, one or both of the boys were suffering from hypothermia and felt like they needed to rest. And as you know, you want to go to sleep, but it's once you go to sleep, then that's it. Or what makes me feel even sadder is that one of them collapsed on the trail and the other one didn't want to leave their side.
Might have laid down together because they both wanted to sleep, and they thought if we
are together, then
it's going to be warm. But then they weren't huddled together.
No, they were just lying side by side.
Which is quite an unnatural position to be in.
Yeah.
Because again, if it's that cold, you're gonna huddle together. We don't like touching each other, but if we were out in this situation...
But then if you're in advanced hypothermia, you're not able to really use any sort of critical thinking or logic.
Yeah, but surely that's a natural survival thing, like look for the warmth. I don't know, but that just seems like quite an unnatural position to be found in.
Yeah. 2 miles northeast of the trailer, Jack Hewitt's father, who was part of the search party, this is the bit I think is the worst, saw his son's jacket lying underneath a bush. And when he picked up the jacket, Jack's spine fell out.
Oh.
The crew then combed the rest of the area and found more skeletal remains belonging to Jack. And it was ruled again that the likely cause of death was hypothermia. They also found Jack's jeans and shoes nearby, but in a way that suggested he had removed them himself before he passed away, which was another indication it was likely hypothermia and he was experiencing the paradoxical undressing. The final discovery was made a quarter of a mile from the trailer, which was 3 blankets from the National Park Service and a rusted flashlight. But it's difficult to know whether they belonged to the boys, whether they had taken them, or if it was past hikers that had left them there, so we don't really know. But during Ted's autopsy, the coroner was surprised to learn that when Ted went missing, he was clean-shaven, because his beard growth suggested that he was alive 8 to 13 weeks after they disappeared. So he had survived a minimum of 2 months in that trailer. Someone was looking after him because he was in no fit state to look after himself, and that was believed to be Gary Mathias. But to this day, Gary has never been found. There is no sign of him at all. No one knows what happened to Gary.
That spun me, that he survived, because I'm thinking this all screams like foul play and someone disposed of them in various places or whatever. But the fact he survived...
Well, we don't know he survived. We can't say either way if he survived or not, because there's just no...
No, like Ted.
Surviving
Ted. 8 weeks.
Yeah, that's what doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
Why were they there? If someone was with him and he didn't just get himself to that cabin and basically he's incapacitated and he's just lying there, why were they there for that long? Why didn't they try and get help, or whoever was with him walk back and get someone? Or why didn't they use the heating supplies? Why didn't they eat enough food to keep them alive properly? So 5 friends, no intention other than just coming home from a college basketball game, took a 2-hour detour in the complete opposite direction, drove up a mountain in the snow, abandoned their car, which was in perfect working condition, with no coats, walked up a mountain in even more treacherous conditions when they could have walked back down. Just 8 miles down as well was a lodge which was filled with people, which would make much more sense to walk back down and get help from someone if they were, I don't know what their situation was, which would mean that they pulled over to the side of the road. But instead they walked 20 miles, 3 of them possibly dying on the route to that cabin. So it makes you think, were they pushed up? Is that why they couldn't push the car out the snow? And why they were driven up and not down? Because at this point they should all be, able to make a logical decision. Why did they roll the window down?
But then they still needed to drive 2 hours out of their way to get to the location to meet someone, say by chance. Talk to them and be pushed up the mountain. They still needed to get 2 hours away from where they were intending to go.
One of the theories is that Jack and Bill all died on the first night of the disappearance. This is because when they got out of the car, there were 2 routes that they could have taken. The first route was the most direct, and it was actually only 11 miles to the trailer. And it basically would have gone all the way up and sort of curved round to meet where the trailer is. The second trail was 20 miles, and it began the same way, but then it kind of splits off to the east, goes around the mountain and back down to meet the trailer. I'll show you the map, but it correlates with where the bodies were found, that they would have taken that trail. So this is the trail.
Okay.
And then that one there would be the more direct. So you see it splits here.
Yeah.
So obviously we'll put this up on the screen. But the first 2 were found just here.
Okay.
And then there was a body literally just before up there. So it would make sense that that was the route that they took. Plus the fact that obviously the small amount of rations that they did find were taken wouldn't be enough for the 5 of the boys. So it would make sense that they didn't, only 2 made it to the trailer. Another reason that they think that Gary was the one that also made it to the trailer was with Ted was because when the police looked at the cans that were open in the trailer, some of them were open using a P38 military can opener.
Okay.
And although Jack Madruga also served in the military, it was believed that Gary would probably be the most likely one to be still carrying the military-issued can opener, along with his shoes as well. It was probably him in the trailer with Ted. I know I thought, why would you pick the longer of the two trails? But if you think none of them actually like the outdoors, they wouldn't know the area for one. Also, the park service rangers were aware of this incoming storm that happened a couple of days, well, the next day that they went missing. So they actually decided that they were going to check on the trailers a couple of days prior to their disappearance. They took out this snowcat, basically, and it's theorised that they took the 20-mile trail round, and it basically would have compacted to the ground and left marks that's the way it went. So they probably saw those marks and thought, we know that leads to something because a vehicle's been through it, we're just going to follow that. But unfortunately it was a very, very long trail.
In all fairness, I didn't even think that, because I just thought, lost out in the woods, I'm not going to know left from right, up from down, I'm just going to walk. You know, you could come to a fork in the road and do eeny, meeny, miny, mo. And that's how you decide, and just hope that the flip of the coin you made is the right decision.
Well, by that point, there probably wasn't much of a path to follow, to be honest. So you're gonna follow the one that's already been made for you. There was one eyewitness in the case.
Oh, okay.
And this witness was called Joseph Shons, and his car was also stuck on the same track that the boy's car was stuck on. Joseph is an interesting character. So according to Joseph, he was driving up the mountain because he was going on a family getaway to one of the cabins, and he wanted to check how bad the snow was going to be. But shortly after he reached the snow cap, his Volkswagen Beetle became stuck at the side of the road, just like the boys. He said he got out to push the car when he started getting signs of a heart attack, and supposedly he had a history of heart issues, so he thought, I know to take this seriously, I'm gonna stop. He then said that the pain was so intense that he actually vomited and defecated at the side of the road, which was actually confirmed by one of the park rangers that found the boy's car. That did happen. So he said he fell asleep in the car and woke up about 11:30 to 12 that night, and he woke up to the sound of someone whistling, like they were trying to call a dog or get someone's attention. So he thought, brilliant, these people might be able to help me. He saw some headlights in his little wing mirror about 100 feet down the road. So he got out, walked round the bend to get a better look and see if these people would help him. He said he saw that 69 Montego, which was Jack's car, parked where the police would later find it, and behind it was a rusty red pickup truck. And he said standing outside of the vehicle were 6 to 7 people, and he remembered seeing a lady that looked like she was holding a baby. So he started to call for help, but as soon as he did, everyone stopped talking and they turned off their headlights. And it looked like everyone went into the red pickup and just went. So Joseph thought, okay, maybe they got stuck and they called for a lift, and they all got in the red pickup.
They just don't want to help me.
They just don't want to help me. So he was annoyed, walked back to his car like, what the fuck, cool.
They're just like, if you're covered in vomit and feces, you're not getting in this red pickup.
He said around an hour later, he was looking in his rear view and he saw what looked like flashlights in the woods walking back and forwards. Again, he got out of the car and yelled for help, and he said as soon as he did, the flashlights went off. So he was probably like, what a day. Why does no one want to help me? So he stormed back to his car. He kept the engine running to try and keep him warm, but about 4 a.m. he ran out of fuel, so he thought, fuck this, I'm gonna walk back down the mountain. He walked 8 miles down, found that lodge, got a lift home by some nice people. After the investigation ensues, he obviously gives his story to the police. But after the boy's disappearance, the sheriff's office offered a reward of, I don't know if this was a lot at the time, but $1,215 for information on the boy's whereabouts. So as you can imagine, thousands of reports came in of where they were. Even some not in America started to come through, including that they were spotted at Miami airport or walking into a movie theatre in Canada, one of which was a woman who worked at a petrol station in Brownsville. Now, this was quite an interesting report, and there was another one that was quite interesting. But this lady said, she worked at a petrol station, and it was one of the towns that the boys would have actually had to turn down to start travelling towards the Plumas National Forest. She said she saw a car pull up, and she saw two guys that she thought had learning difficulties because they were grinning and exuberantly waving at her. She thought by that they must have learning difficulties. As she started walking in, she saw two other men standing in a phone booth outside of the store. And the two guys from the phone booth then came inside, bought some things like chocolate milk and snack bars, and then got back into the vehicle with the two other men and drove away. The store owner corroborated this story, but not only did the store owner say the men came in 2 days in a row, but they came in on the 25th and the 26th. But they disappeared on the 24th. Police showed the woman the missing boys' pictures, and she picked them all out apart from Gary. So Gary wasn't there, but apparently the other four men were. But if that was the case, why would they have come back to the store 2 days in a row, not contacted any family members, yet they were at a payphone? And then they left Gary up the mountain, then drove back up the mountain?
And the day after, the snowstorm hit.
Yeah, and you could say, okay, let's just discount this because it makes no sense. Maybe they just wanted the money. But the car they said they were driving was a rusty red pickup.
So now that gives the other guy some credit, because I'm thinking that other guy is just... Not that he wasn't up there, but I just feel like his account is so abnormal from what would happen. And I know if something like weird and shady is going on with the Yuba Five, they're not going to want to draw attention to themselves, so they are going to act like that. But I just feel like that was too convenient that he could... It just sounded like a story. It really did just sound like a story. And the fact that... Because I just think if my car broke down on top of a mountain or halfway up the mountain and there's loads of snow, if I make it back down, if I've seen other people in the same predicament, even if they didn't want to help me, I'm not going to be salty enough to be like, well, just die then. Die up there, I'm not going to tell anyone. I would be like, oh, just so everyone's aware, there are other people stuck up there, we need to call them help.
Well, he thought that they had gone in the pickup truck. That's what his account was. And then he saw flashlights, but he didn't know that if they were the same people. He thought they were different people.
Yeah, I guess you could kind of try and explain it away to yourself. I don't know.
But the second testimony that came in was from a man called Mr. Redrick. He was fairly well off and he lived in Yuba County. He owned property around the Plumas National Forest, and he said that around a year before the disappearance, he had gone up the mountain to check on his property when Ted showed up with an older man who appeared to be in his 40s or 50s, and what they assumed was his young son of around 14. And the three of them said that they were out hunting, which, again, makes no sense because Ted was scared of the woods and firearms and the dark. And when they spoke to Ted's family, they had no idea who this man or boy could be. But the car they were driving was a rusty red pickup. And I know there must be loads of pickup trucks. It's just so bizarre that this pickup has been reported so many times.
Keeps coming up.
But I genuinely don't know what to make of it, because at first it was quite nice and neat in the fact that the boys, okay, we don't know how they got up the mountain and why they stopped, but 3 of them died on the journey and it was just Ted and Gary left in the trailer. That would make sense. We don't know why they didn't call for help, but that kind of all fit neatly. But then if they were seen consecutively 2 days after at a truck stop petrol station without Gary getting chocolate milk and snacks, they couldn't have died on the first night. But why did they keep coming back? Because they must have done, because their bodies were found up the mountain, so they must have gone back to the mountain.
Unless they went to find Gary.
But Gary was the leader of the group. He wouldn't have left the boys. He felt very protective over them. So it just doesn't make any sense when you put those circumstances in with what we already know.
I don't know if it's like kind of gonna start insinuating that perhaps, was it Ted who was seen at the cabin at that...
A year ago.
Yeah. So perhaps Ted had been groomed potentially by someone nefarious in a rusty red pickup truck, and they had been like, bring your friends to a party in my cabin. And that's why they went all the way over to the mountain in the first place that night. Or it still doesn't make any sense.
No.
But I'm just thinking why they even went the 2 hours out of the way. But if Ted had been there before, then potentially there's some relation to the guy, and that's how the guy in the rusty red pickup truck even knew they were there.
Yeah.
In the first place.
I think there's definitely, without question, some foul play here at some point. When it all came out, the fingers were pointing to Gary. Everyone thought Gary Mathias was to blame.
But why?
They said he was the most intelligent of the 5 boys and he was the leader. So if anyone could have persuaded or forced the boys up the mountain, it would be Gary. And they quickly fell back on his history of criminal violence and drug use and his schizophrenia. I think he was villainized. I don't think Gary was the cause of their ultimate demise.
Especially if him and Ted make it to the trailer alive and spend up to 8 weeks in there together, he's not going to have any of his medication on him. Potentially it could have got bad at that point, but before then, it doesn't make any sense for him to be doing that on the way, especially if he had been doing so well on his medication. And you don't just relapse overnight.
Yeah.
You don't just suddenly on the way back from a basketball game have a psychotic relapse and you're so deep in it that this happens to all of your friends. And also, if you're in a psychotic relapse, your intelligence isn't going to be cunning to then manipulate people. So what are they saying?
Plus, Gary wasn't even driving as well.
Yeah.
So that's quite some control he would have had to have on the driver and the rest of the people in the car to get them to drive 2 hours in the wrong direction.
Yeah. But then I think if the media has such a bad image of the other 4, they might think whatever Gary told them to do, they were just like, yeah, all right.
Yeah.
And didn't question it, didn't be like, no, Gary, we've got a game to get to the next day.
I'll go into a bit more of Gary's background. So, as a child, Gary showed no signs of mental illness whatsoever. Yeah. It was only until he had a head injury in elementary school, and since it was the 60s at that time, and there was very little recognition of mental health issues, his behaviour was just thought of strange or off, and nothing more was done post his head injury. In high school, Gary then began experimenting with drugs. We don't know if that was a way of him self-medicating, if he did then have schizophrenia at that time. But he was well liked at school, and after leaving, he didn't have many prospects, so that's when he joined the military. And after serving for a couple of years and an increase in drug taking, he began to act out, and he would frequently get into fights and be having fits of rage or just be screaming at people. After spending time in the brig for one of these fights, he then punched one of the high-ranking officers. He's actually naked at the time. Not that that's really relevant.
Yeah,
but
shows the mental state.
He said he was doing that as his way to get out of the military. He didn't want to be in the military anymore, so he was trying to get discharged. That's when he had a psych eval, and he was officially diagnosed with his paranoid schizophrenia, and he was discharged from the military. So he ended up cutting off contact with his parents for a bit of time because he wanted to go back to school and he wanted to live with his grandma, but they said, no, we think you should come and live with us because clearly you're not in a good place right now. But he didn't want to do that, so he literally just cut ties with them until one day he turned up at their doorstep dirty and unshaven, and it turned out that on a whim he had decided to walk and partially hitchhike from Portland, Oregon to Yuba County, which was about 550 miles.
Crazy.
I actually Google mapped how long that would take. It says 203 hours.
Damn. Hitchhiking doesn't just scare me of the potential of if I'm the hitchhiker potentially getting into a dangerous situation, or even if I'm the driver, someone getting in and it's a potentially dangerous situation, but having to spend an extended period of time in the car with a stranger. What do you talk about on hitchhiking drive?
Yeah, well, I think he mainly walked that time.
Jesus.
And he said the way he kept himself alive was he would just take milk and dog food from people's porches.
Okay.
But, I mean, that is some wild choice to just wake up and think, you know what, I'm just gonna walk back home from where I am right now. But fair play, he managed it. Clearly he was very well skilled with a map, and he could just take a map and that was it. I mean, there was no Google Maps. I don't think he had a phone.
I don't know what to make of that, because that's just wild. But
he is a bit of a wild card. So once he got to Yuba County, he continued on his violent path and he got into bar fights. He was notorious for groping other men's wives, and that's how he would get into these fights at bars. But possibly one of the more harrowing things that he did was a couple woke up one night and found Gary just stood at the end of the bed in darkness, watching them.
Oh, Gary.
Yeah, and when they asked, what are you doing? He said he was there to get a ring back from them that he needed to give to Satan, and that they were in his house and they owed him money.
Okay, that makes a little bit more sense.
But after that incident, his family started taking it very seriously and thought, you really need to get some help.
Yeah.
Or you hurt someone, or you hurt yourself.
Yeah.
And that was the point they introduced him to the Gateway Projects. And like I say, it was at that point that he started medicating his schizophrenia. It was taken seriously. He was taking that daily. So, I mean, they were checking that he was taking it daily. Yeah. And that's when he completely turned his life around, basically.
And his behaviour completely changed, clearly.
Yeah, his behaviour completely changed.
That's quite extreme behaviour as well, isn't it?
Yeah, so, he became, like I said at the start, a model citizen. He started righting his wrongs, and he helped his dad in running his business. He would frequently volunteer his time in the community, so he was giving back, and like I said, he was a great example of what you could do when you actually got the help you needed. And it was about after a year in the program, his counsellor suggested that he needed to get a group of friends, so that's when he was introduced to the other four boys as the new leader of the Gateway Gators basketball team. Yeah. And then from that point on, they were literally inseparable and they did everything together. At the time of their disappearance, Gary was also in a relationship with his high school sweetheart. So literally his life couldn't have been any better for him at that point. He had a strong group of friends. He was well liked in the community.
Things were coming up Millhouse for this man.
He was doing great. So what would have been his motive to do that to his only group of friends? It just doesn't make any sense. He had really turned it around. I don't see why he would have put the boys in that situation.
It would have to be in his right state of mind as well that he did that. And in his right state of mind, by what's evidenced, he didn't display any worrying or bad behaviour.
No.
All of that was from when he wasn't medicated. So again, you don't just relapse overnight unless he was partially relapsing and was able to keep it hidden. But it doesn't sound like this guy's able to keep it hidden very well.
No.
But
And
if
he was
he's
taking his medication daily. They knew he was.
But he might have been having some symptoms whilst on the medication still and just not showing them or not speaking about them openly. But I just doubt it.
Yeah.
But it's a possibility.
It's possible, but I think the way it presents for him seems to be
quite
rage.
extreme, yeah.
You would know if that were the case, but it is possible. But obviously it didn't stop the news from reporting that he was a crazed schizophrenic and that the 4 boys were led up the mountain by a psychopath.
Right.
But I think Gary was the boys' best chance of surviving out in that mountain. We know that he's very skilled in navigating tough environments, so I think he probably led them up that trail and tried to keep his friends alive.
But then where does the red pickup truck come in?
Yeah, exactly. But I don't think Gary was to blame. I think he did all he could for his friends, and it probably would have been absolutely devastating to lose 3 of them along the way.
Oh, yeah.
And I think he cared for Ted as best as he could. Clearly, I mean, Ted would have been in a state of hypothermia and pneumonia. He probably wasn't wanting to eat, so I think all of the food that he did manage to eat, I think, was as a result of Gary forcing
but still, why wasn't the heating supplies utilised? Because Gary
is the question.
Seems like he would know to do that. Like you said, he is the most rational.
But that again leads you to think, was there someone chasing them? Is that why? But yeah.
And also, by this point, by the time they've made it to the trailer, after a few days, Gary's not going to be much good. Like, he is going to relapse. He's not going to have his medication.
Well, it's interesting you say that. So there were playing cards found by Ted's side. So I think he was like trying to keep his friend's spirit up and play cards with him. But also, he said there were books, and inside of the books were affirmations, which was part of Gary's treatment for his schizophrenia. So he was obviously trying to keep himself grounded. But as time went on, he probably lost his grip on reality. And did that feed into, okay, if there were people chasing them, they probably would have given up, especially if there was a storm. But had the paranoia started to kick in then, and he just didn't want to use any of the heating supplies, or maybe he
didn't
thought
want to draw attention to it.
Or maybe he thought it was a trap to use them, or you never know what would have been going through his mind. But I think he did the best he could. He stood by Ted's side as long as he could. Ted ultimately passed away. He then tried to keep his dignity and wrap him up, and then
got crucified by the damn media.
It's just then, where did he go? Did he I mean, he probably, we know he took some supplies and some blankets because there were some missing. Did he just step out and think, well, I'm going to be villainized if I'm found? Or did he try and make his way home, but he had lost touch by that point, and he also perished out there and was never found? Because we don't know. We know he can travel a great distance. And, you know...
And it was warm. Oh, no, but that was when they found the body. We don't know when Ted actually...
We don't know when... We know it would have been...
Left,
Yeah. We don't know when Gary would have left, but it's probably likely that he did also die out there and just wasn't found.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking,
Yeah, but either way, I don't think it was his fault, and I think he did the best that he could to keep his friends alive.
But then if you are in that paranoid mindset and you do see yourself as the leader of the group, that weight of knowing that your group has all perished, I can see why you wouldn't want to come back, especially if you've already got that paranoia on you. And the paranoia might have gone to way past that, and he might, which I think if it had been that he had totally relapsed and gone back to how he was, I think he would have been found. I don't think he would have been able to keep himself hidden, which is why I also think he's perished, because even if he's adept at travelling long distances, a lot of people would have known about this case in the area. Someone's going to recognise him. And he would need some skill to really stay hidden. So he's probably perished.
What I also find interesting is the pictures that they use for the boys. Even that, I feel like they really villainised Gary, because all the pictures are all normal, but then Gary's one that they picked, he's very severe. I picked a different one. He's in his military uniform. And he looks very severe, and I think, to me, it's like they're trying to paint the picture that he was to blame. Whether that's the case or not, but I thought that. But then I thought, okay, so if it wasn't Gary, who are we saying to blame? This is when we go back to Joseph.
Here we go.
Good old Joseph, who they painted out to be an upstanding citizen who had a medical emergency at the side of the road. Or did he? So Joseph actually was known as the town drunk, and pretty much everyone in the town hated him. He was renowned for drink driving. He would do this often. It was a regular occurrence to see his car at the side of the road. And at first, other people would help him, but they were always met with disdain, and he would be very ungrateful and just give them gyp. So people just gave up, and if they saw his car, they just left it, and they were like, he's just been on one of his benders. He was also known as a compulsive liar as well. He lied about absolutely everything. So it turned out there was no booking for a cabin, there was no family getaway, there was no reason for him going up that mountain. He was in fact drinking in the afternoon. He was seen in a bar. So it's probably likely that he was on one of his benders and he was just drink driving up that road.
I knew this guy was shady.
So not so great. So his initial story that I said obviously was a lie. On top of that, his account was in fact the third version that he had given.
This is always the way with the shady characters. They always have like 5 versions of what happened.
So what we know is he definitely did walk 8 miles down the mountain to that lodge because Good Samaritans took him home. But according to...
probably all had the biggest eye roll ever when drunk Joseph showed up asking for a lift home. They probably thought, oh, this guy. And now we know why no one wanted to help him. If that was true, we don't know. But that's why people, they heard him and just thought, not today.
No, was that Joseph? Drive. drive. But according to the 2 people that drove him home, Joseph was complaining about getting stuck, and he said the reason he was stuck was because there was a car tailgating him all the way up the mountain, and it caused him to spin off the road. So it's difficult to know what version, if there's any truth in either of those versions, but to me, probably what's going to be closer to the truth is what you say pretty much at the time something happened, when you've got less time to think about your story. So if that were the case, could that have been Jack Madruga's car that was tailgating him because someone was chasing them? Who knows?
Or he spun off the road because he was drinking and driving but didn't want to say that, so I was like, oh, I spun off because some jackass was tailgating me. That was my best American accent.
When he got home, he fell asleep and told his wife that the car was stuck up the mountain. His wife went to get it with a friend. He couldn't even be bothered to go and get his car.
He's like, I've almost just had a heart attack, so I'm not going.
His wife confirmed that it was out of petrol, so that possibly was true. And when the police called Joseph for more details on what he saw, because he was quite brief when he reported it at the time, he said he remembers seeing 2 to 12 people around the car, which I don't know
It's a bit of
how you can see 2 to 12.
That's what happens when you've been drinking since the afternoon. Your vision starts blurring and it's like, there could have been 2, there could have been 12. I just don't know.
And it also makes more sense why he vommed and shat himself. He wasn't having a heart attack. He was absolutely steaming.
People are going to be less sympathetic if you say you vommed and shat yourself from a bender other than a heart attack.
Yeah, so that, I think, explains that. But then he goes on to say, yeah, he did see the truck parked there, but the police shouldn't worry about it because he was having a heart attack at the time and could have been hallucinating the truck. So he recounts seeing it.
Yeah, but he wasn't having a heart attack. Because I thought that at the time, like, that's a really calm thing to do when you're mid-heart. Like, if you're thinking you're going to have a heart attack or mid-heart attack, it's really calm to just be like, I'm just going to sleep this off. And, I'm awake again, because I thought, surely you'd be, like, yeah, panicking, ultimately it's not going to help you, but it just sounded really chill. The way he responded to it.
Well, the police then thought, alright, okay, I think we're going to have a face-to-face with this, mate, because what are you saying? By this time, a week had passed since the disappearance, and Joseph was actually in the hospital getting his heart looked at.
That could have been routine.
Well, he had been in there for a couple of days. The testimony he gave in hospital was the one I had recounted at the start, but there are still some things that don't add up. So firstly, the nurses said to the police that for the first couple of days that Joseph was in the hospital, he couldn't stop crying. And he was inconsolable. No one could get him to stop crying.
This guy is such a local annoyance.
Well, it just makes you think, is that a guilty conscience?
Yeah.
Why are you inconsolable?
Yeah, but I just think for the nurses and doctors trying to treat him for his heart condition, they would just be like, dude.
So the doctors did...
What are you doing?
The doctors do think he did have a heart attack, but at some point.
Yeah.
It didn't have to be recently, but his heart did show signs of having a heart attack at some point.
But just because you've had a heart attack doesn't mean you're going to be inconsolably sobbing.
No. And it doesn't mean that happened on the mountainside either. That could have been prior, and maybe he did get chest pains. Who knows? Also, Joseph was compliant all the way through the visit with the police. He was very personable. He was answering all their questions until they began asking specifics around the boys, which direction they went, what they looked like, what vehicle they got in. And at that point, he sat back in his hospital bed and said, "You think that I know more than I'm letting on, don't you?" And that is the weirdest reaction from an innocent witness.
Do you know, though, I thought you were going to say he sat back in his hospital bed and pretended to have another heart attack.
Whilst hooked up to a heart monitor. That's
the
fine.
veins are coming back. Just like, oh no, I shat myself again. But no, that is very suspect. Just because he's personable, like even when you said he was personable, he answered all their questions until, even that, I'm just like, means nothing.
Yeah, and so on top of that as well, the people at the lodge at the time Joseph came in said he walked over to a chair, literally put his head in his hands and said, "I should have done this 2 years ago."
Had a heart attack or
What that could be relating to, I don't know. Obviously, it's probably not going to be related to the boys, because what should have driven them up there 2 years ago, should have chased them in the woods 2 years ago. That probably doesn't make any sense. So who knows what was going through his mind in his drunken stupor down the mountain. But it is a kind of weird comment to make. For me, I think, does that relate more to if someone chased them up there? Should he have done something about that person 2 years ago? Did he know the person that was in the truck?
I wonder if the boys had some kind of dirt on him or something.
I mean...
And he thought, I should have taken care of them 2 years ago, because it would have been a lot less stress on my heart these past 2 years, thinking my secrets were going to get that out.
But 2 years ago...
That's quite a far out there theory.
Gary wouldn't have been in the group.
Oh, yeah.
So, I don't really know. I think it's weird. I don't know if it relates, but I definitely think he knew more than he was saying.
Letting on.
Some people think he was directly responsible for what happened. I don't think so. I think it was more of a case of wrong place, wrong time. I don't think he actually did anything. I do think he saw something and didn't say. And I think that was the red truck. Yeah. And I think he might have even known who was driving that truck and didn't come forward with that. And maybe that's what he felt guilty about. But he was known for his temper, and yes, he was drunk, but also this was a man that had shit and vomited down himself. Like, I don't think he was in any...
There are some people that do things like a drunk driving accident or something where they don't mean, or fly into a fit of rage, and when they come out of it, they're so disgusted in themselves of what they've just done that the shock of it makes them vomit or defecate.
Yeah, but I mean, equally, there were 5 of them.
Yeah.
Gary in particular was known for standing his ground when it came to his friends. We know he's been in multiple fights before. Yes, that was pre-medication, but we know he's got it in him. I don't think he could have been intimidated by one man who was drunk.
You don't know if it was something that wasn't so much of an intimidation and more of an accident. I don't know what it could have been, but what if the car that was tailgating someone who made them spin off the road was Joseph's car? What if he was the one tailgating because he was drunk driving like an idiot, made them spin off the road, and the boys were like wound down their window? He also pulled up in front of them. Right, let's say he's just made them spin off the road. He's like, oh, I better like see they're all right. So he goes and he sees they're all right. The boys roll down their window and they're like, hey man, we can't get out. How do we get out? And because Joseph's just a dick and drunk, he's like, oh yeah, just up there. And just goes to sleep off the drink in his car, wakes up and he's like, the boys are nowhere to be found and there's a snowstorm coming in. In his sober mind, he's like, shit, I sent them the wrong way and I probably just made them all peril.
But they could have just pushed their car and gone back down the mountain. Or they could have walked back down the mountain.
Yeah. I'm coming out there with some really far out possibilities.
I think, it's just really hard to make sense of, because something should have, like, there's no reason for them to go walk into the woods up into the mountain unless they were pushed that way.
Yeah.
Because it just doesn't make any sense. Yeah, I just think Gary at least would have stuck up for them. And
and Gary would have been like, why would we walk up and not down? And can you help us push our car out?
Well, there's 5 of them. One of them can get out and push. And even just the weight of all of them in the car probably would have been enough to align the wheel again.
And I feel like if he did run them off the road, he would have just driven off. He wouldn't have cared.
Yeah. So Joseph had a bit of a past. So him and his wife had actually attempted to grow weed on 2 occasions. So they kind of knew, like, sellers, you know, some seedy people in the area. So I don't know, like, if he did recognise someone, and then, or if he didn't, even if he was like fearful for his life and he was like, I'm just not going to say anything. I might have accidentally said it at first, but I'll just say that it wasn't real. I don't know. I think with his crying as well, he's definitely guilty about something. Yeah, it just brings me back to more questions than I have answers, because I think even if your theory happened, why then were they seen by that lady in the petrol station?
Well, why were they even there in the first place? I think to like solve the case, you almost need to go from the beginning of like the first decision they would have made to go out their way. Why did they do that? And I feel like if you can answer that, it's gonna give you way more answers than what we've got from going like backwards about the cabin. Because then you would know why they were there, and if anyone else was involved, that would be suspicious as well. So I feel like that's like the first kind of thing you need answers to.
Because clearly they weren't being chased from the moment that they left the basketball game, because they stopped to get food. So then there was no altercation noted at that point. So what happened from there, I just don't know. It just doesn't make any sense. If it was Joseph, then surely the five would have stuck up from themselves. Why were they seen 2 days later on 2 separate occasions at the same place without Gary? Where was Gary if that was true? Why was Ted seen a year ago up there if he didn't like woods, or if he didn't like firearms? Was he seen, or was it a case of they just wanted, like, did word about town go round about this red pickup, and that's why people were mentioning it, because they wanted the money?
I did think that it could have been hearsay of the red pickup, and then the other people who wanted the money was like, oh, there's a red, Joseph said there was a red pickup involved, so I'm just going to say it. And I always think, even if the police department left that detail out of the media, there's always going to be policemen who go home to their wives and tell them about the case. It's a small town. I don't even know if they did keep it out of the media, but if they did, I can see how it wouldn't be so concrete that means that other people wouldn't know about it, because it's a small town and people talk, and police departments can be more laxed in small towns and definitely more informal. So
I think even if you took out those 2 witness things, there's still bits that don't make sense. And we'll never really know what is the truth with Joseph Shons. He passed away in 2004, so
was it from a heart attack?
I don't know.
Sorry,
we can't go back and ask. He will never come out and say that has died with him. I don't know whether something chased them, they passed away along the route, and it was just Ted and Gary, and then Gary was like distraught losing his friends. He's now looking after his last remaining friend. Did he then just think quickly, did he spiral? If he did spiral, is that why they didn't leave? Or
and you know, it's sad because it's such an old case as well, and there are still old cases from the 60s, 70s being solved today, but that's because police had DNA that couldn't have been tested at the time, and now today it's been preserved well enough that they can retest it with people in the database and they get a match. But unfortunately, it doesn't even seem like there would be any way of getting concrete answers, especially because one of the key witnesses has now died himself. I don't know how police would get those answers, so it's probably going to remain a mystery.
It was definitely foul play to an extent. Just we'll never know what that looked like.
It's a mind twister.
It is. Sure. I was trying to think, like, what is my opinion to end it on? What do I think? And I genuinely don't know what I think.
I feel like every time I form an opinion on it, there's then something to say, well, that wouldn't make any sense either.
I think looking at everything, it can't all be true. Like, whether the witness accounts, it was mistaken identity, I don't know, but it just, all the facts together surely they can't all be facts. Because it just physically can't be possible, surely.
I do wish there was more of a push on the foul play aspect. At the time, because then I think maybe some more investigating would have been done, or some people who thought things weren't suspicious might have thought, oh, if foul play's involved, I actually saw this and this looked a bit suspicious. Like when you put out the narrative of it's these 5 boys who are all slow being led away by a psychopath.
Psycho. Case closed.
People are just going to be like, oh, well, that's a really tragic thing that's happened, but they wouldn't necessarily connect dots if they had been like, we've got these 5 missing boys and we suspect foul play. People might have made links of things that they had seen.
I mean, interestingly, there are people in Yuba County that say they know exactly what happened, but they won't say for fear of their safety. So whether we might eventually know
Get, like,
when those
deathbed
people,
confessions.
or
Yeah.
when those people who are involved are no
Yeah.
longer here, or if they're just saying that,
To be part of the case.
yeah, to
You do get
have
weird
some
people out
gossip.
there. Yeah.
You do. But we'll never know. Maybe we might find out what happened to them in time, because if this was the 70s, well, we have to wait a little bit longer, I guess, depending on how old the people were that are involved. But yeah, is truly a mystery. But if you guys think you might know, if you've seen a red pickup,
We're of no one of authority. Any
Yeah.
theories, comment down below. I've thoroughly enjoyed that case. It was an interesting one.
yeah, I hope I did the 5 boys justice, because they really didn't deserve some of the reports that they got. And it would have been very different had it have happened today.
Yeah, definitely.
So hopefully that gave them a little bit more justice, and they weren't painted to be the incompetent boys that they were at the time, because that was very much not the case.
Yeah.
But yeah, would love to know what you guys think. Please do tell us if you have a theory. I'll be very intrigued to hear it.
And we hope you enjoyed today's episode, and please join us for next week's episode, where I'll be going over a missing persons case that I find really interesting. So, we'll see you next time.
As always, stay spooky and stay kooky.
See you later.
Bye.
Spooky and kooky, mystery and wonder. Feel the magic